By mid-century, we'll likely have self-driving cars, more widespread internet access, and semi-smart robots. But despite our technological advances, humanity has failed to solve many of its problems. The world hasn't weaned itself off fossil fuels or antibiotics, protected the rainforest, or reduced the stigma surrounding mental illness. We haven't flood-proofed our cities or protected our energy grids from natural disasters. With 2050 just a few decades away, major issues await the world. Science and technology need to start focusing on solutions to make the future better than the terrifying reality approaching. 1. The number of people living in cities will likely triple. In 1950, just under 750 million people lived in urban areas. Today, that figure has ballooned to more than 4 billion, more than half the world's entire population, and the upward trend is set to continue. By mid-century, about 6.3 billion people will live in cities. Aside from overcrowding, the skyrocketing population will likely spur the fastest spread of infectious diseases and viruses, from tuberculosis to the flu. Dwindling water supplies and inadequate sanitation will only compound the negative health effects. Compared to rural areas, cities consume about 3/4 of the world's energy and produce the same amount of global carbon emissions. Therefore, a rise in the urban population will also put pressure on energy demands and generate more pollution, potentially making the air toxic to breathe, similar to the situation in Beijing unfolding over the last decade. According to the World Health Organization, outdoor air pollution is estimated to have caused 3.7 million premature deaths worldwide in 2012. This will only increase as urban populations rise and pollution worsens. 2. The air could be thick with pollution, worsening lung conditions and respiratory diseases. By 2050, the number of deaths caused by air pollution, which includes tiny particles found in smoke and haze, ground-level ozone typically emitted by cars, and toxic components in household products and building materials, will soar, killing more than 6 million people every year, according to a recent report from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development (OECD). Why? Because in addition to dirtier skies, warmer weather will speed up the chemical reactions that produce many pollutants. One of those toxins is ground-level ozone, a chemical that irritates the delicate tissue lining the lungs and causes coughing, feelings of burning, wheezing, and shortness of breath when inhaled. Ozone often worsens respiratory conditions like asthma and emphysema. 3. More than half of the world's population may not have adequate access to water. Today, 1.1 billion people lack access to water. And 2.5 billion people, 36% of the world's population, live in regions of the world experiencing water stress. 20% of the world's GDP is produced in these areas as well. Already, water scarcity haunts 2.7 billion people, nearly 40% of the world's population, for at least 1 month every year, either because they don't have access to clean water or because they can't afford it, Water Footprint Network says. And 1 billion people, about 1/6 of the world's population, face daily shortages, according to the foundation. By 2050, however, this number will likely increase. Nearly 2 billion people will live in countries, mostly in the Middle East and North Africa, with absolute water scarcity, according to the International Water Management Institute. And by 2050, MIT researchers say that 5 billion of the world's projected 9.7 billion people could live in water-stressed areas. Aside from a lack of drinking water, populations in these areas might not have the means to irrigate their fields, threatening food supply, or for other domestic, industrial, and environmental purposes. Currently, 1/3 of the world's rivers, groundwater for about 3 billion people, are going or gone, according to the World Preservation Foundation. With population growth and global warming, the situation will only worsen. The drying of lakes and rivers releases greenhouse gases, like carbon dioxide and methane, into the air, potentially exacerbating climate change. Because of the water cycle, the world will also face more droughts, potentially making wildfires at least twice as destructive by 2050. 4. Diseases will spread with ease. A gradually warming climate will expand the range of pests carrying deadly disease. People who are affected will have little immunity from the disease. The result: diseases that are deadlier than ever. 5. Rising water levels could flood major cities across the globe. Sea levels across the globe are set to rise by roughly a meter, a little over 3 feet, by 2100 if carbon emissions continue unchecked. Without proper planning, coastal cities from New York City to Calcutta, India, will be devastated. Rising waters will begin to take their toll before 2100, of course. If sea levels rise by just 1.5 feet, the level expected for many cities, including the New Jersey Shore, by mid-century, many people will lose their homes. Cities will lose valuable assets. A 2008 report from the OECD found that Calcutta will likely be the hardest hit city in the world, with 14 million people and $2 trillion in assets exposed by 2070. New York City made the list too, with 2.9 million people and $2.1 trillion in assets laid bare to storm surges. The rising tide will be felt acutely in the US, where by 2050 most of the cities along the northeast coastline will likely see more than 30 days of flooding each year.